This is Business Weekend with Ross Greenwood.
Hi there and welcome to Business Weekend. I'm Ross Greenwood. It is great to have your company today. Coming up on the program, Virgin's highly successful share market float this week was in hindsight great timing. But our timing in going behind the scenes to understand its 23% shareholder Qatar Airways, well, that wasn't so good. The reports started to filter out to us here at the Doha airport about 15 minutes ago about these missile attacks on the Al Udeid airbase, which is only 25 kilometres away from us in that direction. The current tenuous ceasefire and hostilities between Israel and Iran catapulted world stock markets back to all-time records. The big question is, how long can this last?
We're now all looking at government leaders all over the world for what they're doing, be that geopolitically or otherwise. That is now, I think, absolutely central to understanding markets from here.
And last week, before hostilities in the Middle East flared, we were going to bring you a special program about Australia's glacial progress in fixing problems that constantly beset communities after natural disasters. So today we're going to bring you an abridged version of that program.
Small businesses and primary producers can access 25,000, but they need more. They need more and they need more now.
So all that coming up on today's program. But look, to start, in life, timing is everything, as I said. And this week, the airline Virgin Australia got its timing absolutely right as it successfully refloated onto the Australian Stock Exchange. But look, that float coincided with the missile attack on a US airbase on the outskirts of Doha, the home of Virgin's 23% shareholder, Qatar Airways. By coincidence, I was in Doha, courtesy of Qatar Airways, to help understand the strategy behind Australia's rejuvenated second airline. But as I say, our timing, well, that wasn't so good. The Al Udeid Air Base on the outskirts of Doha is the biggest US base in the Middle East. The attack, for most, including the 10,000 of us who were suddenly stranded at the Doha airport, was a surprise. The reports started to filter out to us here at the Doha airport about these missile attacks on the Al Udeid airbase, which is only 25 kilometres away from us. 6 missiles were aimed at the airbase by Iran in retaliation for attacks by America on its 3 nuclear facilities. The missiles were flagged ahead by Iran, then intercepted by Qatar's own Patriot missile defence system. But the fact that any attack took place on a country often described as the Switzerland of the Middle East that has maintained relations with Iran was lost on no one.
That will definitely have its scar on the relationship, what happened today, but I hope that by the time that everyone learns the lesson that this kind of neighbourhood relationship should not be violated and should not be undermined.
That attack, though, was a catalyst for the ceasefire between Israel and Iran.
كان هناك
Our friends in the United States have asked Qatar to contact the Iranian side to see how ready they are for this ceasefire, and we made the needed calls which led to the announcement that was made by the US president.
Even though it needed some urging by the US president.
We basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
The great fear after the US attacks was that war in the Middle East would re-erupt and that Iran would seek to block the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz, disrupting global shipments of oil and natural gas.
We can say that the Strait of Hormuz, along with the Strait of Malacca, is the most important choke point in the world, probably for the world economy, not just for the energy world.
But for Iran, a full-scale war would also have been devastating for an already weakened regime.
Neither Israel nor the US said they wanted to change the regime. In general, the Iranian people would not accept that. The Iranian regime will fall through a people's revolution, and that day is close.
The reason Business Weekend was in Doha was to look behind the scenes at Qatar Airways, which recently acquired 25% of Virgin Australia. We asked the airline to take us there. By coincidence, last week, Qatar was judged the best airline in the world for the 9th time. So you might think our timing was perfect. And that's how we ended up in the Qatari desert, not far from the Saudi Arabian border. From the deserts of the Middle East, where the temperature is regularly in the mid-40s, as it is right now, there was seemingly no life. But from this came the enormous wealth generated by oil and gas, and that created some of the strongest economies in the world per capita. But now there's a race against time to turn that wealth into something more sustainable, and airlines like Qatar are at the very heart of that. But because of the emerging political situation in the Middle East, when we got to Qatar, all the planned interviews were, for the time being, shut down. Again, it's about timing. Back in Australia, though, the timing of the Virgin float, in hindsight, was just about perfect. Well, almost.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously it's been an interesting 24 hours or even Yeah, try that again. We're very now focused on serving the domestic Australia market and serving the customers we can win. We're serving the small business, serving the value corporate, serving the premium leisure segment, those people who really value the product that we put out there. And
the new Virgin, if we can call it that, doesn't have an international airline. For now, it relies on its linkage to Qatar, whose now 23% share was approved by the Treasurer earlier this year. And that stake is now worth around $590 million. But the Virgin CEO this week didn't rule out a return to international flying, which coincidentally sank its predecessor.
Now that we've launched the flying in partnership with Qatar, we'll have a real window into what the performance of long-haul flying is today. And we'll be able to use that to put together our own numbers and see whether we can justify the capital of investing in going into the long haul.
But before Virgin ever thinks about making its own international flights, it should pause and think about the chaos at Doha's airport this week, when the airspace was closed, and the previous shock events that have crippled international airlines, like SARS, bird flu, 9/11, the global financial crisis, Ebola, and the very thing that killed off the previous version of Virgin, COVID-19. For Qatar, the linkage with Virgin gives it political clout to lift the number of flights it makes into Australia. In 2023, Transport Minister Catherine King was under pressure after taking apparent unilateral action to deny Qatar 21 extra weekly flights, at least partly based on strip searches of 5 Australian women at the Doha airport in 2020. To this day, the Prime Minister continues to have confidence in his minister. But now, after the Virgin deal, Qatar will wet lease aircraft to Virgin and potentially use up to 28 flight slots from Australia to Doha that are currently unused. The first of these Virgin flights took off 2 weeks ago using Qatar crew, aircraft and catering, but branded as Virgin Flights. The whole service that for 9 years has seen Qatar named by Skytrax as the best airline in the world. And key to that is its catering, with 4,000 people working 24/7 to produce staggering amounts of food. A great reputation is built on the consistency of quality, and that's the reason why Qatar is so paranoid about its reputation in this kitchen. One stray hair and its reputation is affected. That's why everybody's so covered up. This kitchen knocks out around 200,000 meals a day. That's about 73 million per year. This machine itself, the omelette machine, knocks out around 5,000 of them every day. But in every case, it is about the consistency of that product. Skytrax, in giving Qatar its latest award, said the on-board product focuses on comfort, fine cuisine, the latest in-flight audio and video entertainment, award-winning service and a modern aircraft fleet averaging around 5 years of age. It means for the first time in a long time, Qantas, with its Emirates alliance, has genuine competition, again centred around a Middle Eastern airline. And a part of Qatar's growth strategy in Australia comes through its freight offering. Normally in an aircraft such as this one, a Boeing 777, you'd expect to see seats and people. But these days, freight is just as important as shipping people is around the world. Qatar now is the biggest shipper of airline goods anywhere in the world. It shipped last year around 2.6 million tonnes of freight through its facilities in Doha. And it didn't matter whether it was pharmaceuticals or whether it was zoo animals or racehorses or fresh food. The fact of the matter is it remains the hub where it can then connect with cities all over the world without stopping. Though the timing of the Iranian attacks this week were less than ideal for Qatar and for us, it again shows that in aviation, you constantly have to expect the unexpected. And that lesson, no doubt, is not lost on the new Virgin Australia management. But the latest Middle East conflict, according to some, is part of a bigger geopolitical shift that both business and investors need to understand. It goes to the pressure on governments to spend more on defence, to tariffs and also to the future sources of energy. You can see some of this in the market reactions of oil, gold and equities in the past few weeks. Ben Powell is Chief Investment Strategist for the Asia Pacific and Middle East for the global investment house BlackRock, and he joins me now from his base in Dubai. Ben, many thanks for your time. Can I just start about the shift geopolitically that BlackRock sees that you sense also changes even the investment markets into the future?
That's right, Ross. So we at BlackRock think that we are in a fundamentally different geopolitical paradigm, which interlinks very directly with government policy, economic policy. So we're seeing kind of a blending of geopolitics with fiscal spending, most obviously in defense, but also in artificial intelligence, which increasingly is kind of a national security subject. So what we're seeing now is geopolitics becoming absolutely central to government policy, and government policy has gone from being, frankly, something that we as investors would kind of treat as less important 10, 15, 20 years ago, to now absolutely central. So we're now all looking at government leaders all over the world for what they're doing, be that geopolitically or otherwise. That is now, I think, absolutely central to understanding markets from here.
And so even, say, for example, the attacks in the Middle East and on Iran in particular, which is a weakened regime, this appears to be trying to break down the bloc that could have been created between Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. Is that part of the strategy geopolitically, you think?
I think we're seeing in real time a kind of rewiring of global geopolitics, and everyone is in play, right? So I think we have to be realistic. The future is particularly uncertain at the moment, and naturally, every nation is trying to play every side, play both sides, every side for the benefit of themselves and their people. So that's kind of, totally natural that governments should be acting in a self-interested way to try and make it better for themselves and their people. That's very different, I guess, to what we had post-Second World War, maybe through to COVID, where there was kind of an understanding that global institutions, increasing globalization, probably in the round was a good thing. That feels very old hat now, and I think we're much more in a situation where it's every country for themselves, and that means, kind of go for it for one's own individual self-interest, and we think that's going to continue.
Okay, so then countries such as Australia, which have basically opened themselves up to free trade, which have literally given away their car industry, given away much of their chemicals processing, from that point of view, it really becomes perhaps a more dangerous world in terms of who your allies are and who you can rely on for defence in the future.
I think that's right. I think we just have to accept that it's a more complicated world, and we as investors need to live with that, to learn to live with that. It's not going to change. So if you're, sadly, if we're all kind of waiting for geopolitical calm and a return to easier days, I think you're going to be waiting an awful long time. So as investors, we kind of just need to get on with it, accept this kind of new risk and learn to live with it. Because to your point, Ross, whether you're a government leader, a central banker or an investor, it's all a bit more complicated. So that's maybe sad, but it's true and real in our assessment from BlackRock. So as investors, we have to accept it and learn to live and navigate accordingly.
So Ben, in your opening statement, you basically said that this was also about artificial intelligence and the race for artificial intelligence. Now, the two key powers here are quite clearly the United States and China. And this is all about data and the amount of data you can harness. It's about the price of energy to run those giant data centres. And it's also about the ability to be able to not just use, but misuse information into the future. So where do you sense that lies right now?
I think it's central to kind of everything. I don't want to sound too kind of over the top and grandiose, but I think if we are in the process of creating abundant intelligence via silicon, artificial intelligence, that has implications for everything, I think, including geopolitics, national security, defense, military hardware, I guess, but it's kind of bigger than that. It's going to be core to societal functioning over time. By the way, this won't all happen in the next week or even year or two, but I think clearly if we can have more intelligence and apply that to more problems, including, more prosaic stuff like helping transport systems run on time, whatever, you can apply intelligence across the board. So Ross, I think it is absolutely critical, and therefore it's reasonable that national leaders all over the place are very focused on how they can have, every country needs to have what is called a sovereign AI, an AI they can rely on, in this case, for the benefit of the Australian people specifically, the data they can trust, information they can trust, and bringing that intelligence to bear in a way that's good for the Australian people over time.
So I was going to ask you about that, because that sovereign AI, that notion of having a national capacity for the data handling and management, also goes to the notion of who your allies are, who you rely on to create that data centre, to store that data securely, because if it's not, then quite clearly it opens up opportunities for potential enemies in the future.
I think you're right. So I think what we are moving towards, for better or worse, again, is in markets we have to deal with the world as it is rather than maybe the world we would prefer. So I think every nation is going to become much more self-reliant where they can. Ultimately, hopefully we can still trust ourselves. And then the kind of the list of people we feel comfortable sharing information with, I guess in the Australia context, Five Eyes comes to mind, but whatever, it's going to be a very low number, right? And a much lower number that I think we've all got used to over the last several decades. So we are in a different epoch now, which, as I say, kind of transcends everything, including artificial intelligence. And ultimately, if we can do things for ourselves, even frankly, if it's a little bit more expensive, that's a trade-off that politicians are going to be wrestling with. And I think at the margin, we are moving, the global economy is moving in a direction of deliberately becoming less efficient, which sounds a bit weird, but the positive trade-off for that is you can become more secure, more safe, more reliant. And that's a trade-off we're watching in real time. Hopefully we can get both, cheap and safe, but I think the direction to travel is a little bit more expensive and hopefully a little bit more resilient and safe as the positive kind of consequence.
Ben Powell, Chief Investment Strategist for the Asia Pacific and the Middle East for BlackRock. I appreciate your time from Dubai today. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Well, coming up on Business Weekend, our special forum on Australia's resilience to natural disasters and how our politicians need to serve our battered communities better. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend. Well, last week we were set to bring you a full hour of Business Weekend with a special forum we put together on natural disasters and the way local communities often are left to fend for themselves after politicians have taken their photo opportunities and returned to either Canberra or their capital city. Unfortunately, events in the Middle East intervened, so we couldn't bring you that full program. This week we bring you an abridged version. The full program is available on our website and on our YouTube channel. Our motivation for bringing this panel together is the growing number of natural disasters that continue to smash Australia. Be it floods, bushfires or cyclones, they're the most common. In isolation, none of them are new. Australians have always had to deal with natural disasters, going back to the 1806 flood of Melbourne or the 1835 Black Thursday bushfires. So to begin, this is the way Sky News has seen some of the most recent events.
Thank you for joining us. The New South Wales mid-north coast is beginning to assess the damage left behind from severe rain and floods this week. Early estimates by the New South Wales SES indicate 10,000 properties have been damaged in the floods, and at the moment 150 warnings remain in place.
The scary bit's over for most people. There's still helicopters coming in and out, so I'm assuming that there are still some evacuations, but now we're left with the really unsexy part, which is the clean-up.
We know it's been incredibly tough.
It's a sign of the times that some of you I've actually met today for the third or fourth time because you have been so present when Australia is going through disasters.
Unique challenges in this northeast corner, and what's happening, we're finding, is that we're not actually getting the support of some of the local government areas here. They're actually putting more imposts on farmers and making it difficult.
You've crossed to us at the most intense time that we've experienced over on Brisbane's Bayside. The storm is crossing the coast as we speak. It crossed up north of where we are a couple of hours ago.
They talk about the 3 R's, firstly rescue, then restocking and then recovery, and they are in the thick of it right now. Just to give you some idea, already the streets here in the middle of the CBD just littered now with stock. All these shop fronts, as you can see, have been forced to pull everything that was once inside now out onto the streets.
There's people that are missing, people can't get in touch with their loved ones, telecommunications are down.
As a 51-year-old woman with very little super, it's quite a daunting position to be in, having so much debt and not knowing if my house has got any value left in it.
These packages need to become larger and they need to start getting to people's bank accounts sooner rather than later.
Mud everywhere, all the equipment was submerged, all the mixing tanks were over, we couldn't open two of the doors. It was a complete and utter disaster.
I'm just afraid, to be honest. There's one side of me that is cautious, and it's stressful knowing that it could happen again, and I really do believe it will.
Well, as you can see there, these events destroy people and they destroy communities. 5 people died in the recent New South Wales floods. 38 died in the repeated floods that swept through New South Wales and Queensland in 2022. And in 2019, 20 bushfires, the so-called Black Summer bushfires, 34 lives were lost, along with an estimated 1 billion wild animals, more than 2,500 homes. The mental toll on those who were not insured or not strong enough is just also hidden in the cold, hard statistics. I've personally seen this firsthand in the aftermath of these tragedies. I've got to tell you, it is often very hard to deal with. Communities are also affected. Businesses, jobs, agriculture, tourism and home prices all suffer when these events sweep through a region. But these events, nobody can doubt, are happening more frequently. They're more intense. They affect more people. The recent mid-north coast flood saw the Manning River exceed 1929 levels. Not just that, the flood level of 6.5 metres exceeded the previous known record by half a metre. The damaging effect of weather-related events is compounded by our growing population. More people means more people and more infrastructure in harm's way. But the next time a politician turns out in a rain jacket or fire services vest, we suggest they do more than just offer small relief packages and kind words. And this week in the New South Wales budget, the Minns government flagged a change to its emergency services levy, which is essentially a tax on people and businesses who take out insurance. New South Wales is the only state with this type of levy, and we'll endeavour to speak with its Treasurer, Daniel Mookie, in the coming weeks. In the meantime, today, we explore what can and should be done before the next natural disaster. Should people be forced to move from their homes? Should whole towns be moved? Should extra money be devoted to make communities safer? Should government, state and federal step in to ensure people can afford to insure their homes and their businesses? So, to our panel of experts, the outgoing New South Wales National Senator, Perrin Davey, who was previously Deputy Leader of the Nationals and Shadow Minister for Water and Emergency Management. There's Kate Cotter, Chief Executive and founder of the Resilient Building Council, which she was prompted to create after her first-hand experience in the Black Saturday bushfires in 2009. Andrew Hall is Chief Executive of the Insurance Council of Australia, with whose assistance we created this forum today. Jane Laverty is the regional director for Northern Rivers for Business New South Wales. She's based in Lismore, which has copped the brunt of devastating floods early this year. Also, Thomas Mortlock, the senior director and head of climate analytics at the reinsurance company Aon. He's worked for more than 15 years in climate science, catastrophe risk modelling and insurance resilience and flood and coastal risk management.
Look, as former Shadow Emergency Management Minister, I was well aware of the issues, and I turned up not just in my own communities, but other communities who had faced tragedy, natural disasters. And I will say this, for every local politician, for every House of Reps member who represents an area, whatever colour of the political spectrum they are embedded in their communities. So they feel the trauma and the tragedy as well as their communities, and they all hit the phones straight away because they want the assistance for their communities. Back in 2018, the then coalition government established with state governments the disaster recovery funding arrangements. That was designed to cut some of the red tape so that we could get money out the door, federal money to assist state recovery efforts, out the door in a streamlined manner. They work to some extent, but there is definitely need for improvement, and we've just seen with the most recent mid-north coast floods the delay in making the declaration of the disaster. Different states have different effectiveness at it, and New South Wales has announced Category C funding, so small businesses and primary producers can access $25,000. But they need more. They need more, and they need more now. We know that New South Wales can ask for Category D funding, but they are saying they need more information and more assessment, and they're actually going to farmers saying fill in more forms.
So this is the ongoing issue, though, because, Andrew Hall, if I come to you now, in your pre-election submission and pre-budget submissions, you've called on government to basically spend some $30 billion to make Australian communities safer. $30 billion, though, is not money that it has to come from somewhere. It either has to be borrowed, it either has to be taxed, or indeed it has to come from other areas of priority that government might have. Do you sense that government simply, or politicians simply go home and put your number in the too hard basket?
Well, Ross, it's a big number, but unfortunately there is no silver bullet, easy fix to this problem in the country, and we've got to be looking at what we invest not only in the next few months in a recovery, but what we invest over 10, 20 and 30 years on resilience and mitigation. And unless we make a start now on doing more serious levels of investment, the problem's only going to get bigger and more expensive to shift. And $30 billion over 10 years for a flood defence fund in Australia, it is a lot of money. But if you break it down year on year, it's about $1.5 billion from the Commonwealth every year, matched by the states. We think that that is an opening for a discussion. The federal government built upon the scheme that Perrin referred to, and they've created a disaster ready fund of $200 million a year. But the problem is that we're only seeing that go out in smaller grants for small projects. When was the last time we saw significant licks of funding that go towards building a flood levy that would raise the Lismore levy a little bit higher, that could build retention bases, protect Bundaberg? There's a whole list of communities that have got plans ready to go, and we've got to find a bucket of money to start progressing that large-scale community infrastructure.
Well, OK, so on this subject, I want to now hear from Matthew Fawcett, who's an insurance broker based in the Taree region. Now, he's also the president of the local business group called Team Taree. Now, he's seen a lot of big weather events in Taree, and he says the latest flood just last month was the straw that broke the back for many of the local business owners there.
The current government grants that we've finally seen the announcement properly come out yesterday of a $5,000 upfront and then a $20,000 follow-on one is just not sufficient to help these businesses, one, fix their carpet and internal fit outs, to let alone buy stock in that they didn't have insured because, one, it was too expensive because of the location, because some of our streets are high flood risk anyway, so the insurers just won't provide it, or it's just not uneconomical for them. So that if they do come back in, they're taking the gamble again that we're not going to have a flood that's going to affect them. We need to really look back at that and pay out what we've seen to Lismore and things like that. We need to be looking more to that 50 or 75,000 to give businesses the confidence to come back into our town and start trading again and help them along that journey.
So, Joe Leverty, you're in Lismore, you're with Business New South Wales, obviously a business owner as well. You know, what you're hearing there is whether the government response is sufficient, whether there's enough done and whether it's proactive enough to keep businesses viable in many of our regional communities.
Absolutely. I mean, the cost of recovery is significant for a small business, and these are mum and dad operators. They usually don't have a lot just sitting in the bank to pull out. And you talked about livelihoods, lives. This is livelihoods as well. And a lot of these business operators are supporting many families in their communities. So it's not just them, it's a whole community that is impacted when a small business is impacted.
OK, we'll get to insurance at some stage in the future, but you heard Andrew talk about whether the Lismore, your home community, whether the levy bank should be raised there to protect the town. And of course, that would mean then maybe insurance policies, the prices would come down. Whether these are measures government needs to take in the absence of anything else that can be done for a community to protect itself.
And the government has invested. Currently we have the CSIRO doing some reports, LIDAR modelling, to understand and run scenarios to see what would be those future impacts. But from the people on the ground, they just want some certainty. They actually want to regain confidence that what they invest in their business won't be all lost. And so they want to see governments working together, bringing solutions to the table. And there's probably not one standalone solution. There will be many, but they want to see those that are in leadership taking the initiative, working with business, working with communities and making it safer for them.
All right, so it's interesting here because I want to also go on the government response. And in this particular case, let's go back to Matthew Fawcett from Taree. One issue here is an emergency services levy. It desperately needs reform, he says, to protect communities.
They can't afford the insurance, one, because the emergency services levy in New South Wales is an automatic 20% loading. So clients could be between 20 and 30% worse off because of that tax, because we're paying a tax on a tax on a tax. So that would be a quick solution, not a quick solution, sorry, a solution that the New South Wales government can put in is reforming that to a fairer system that all people with property pay that emergency services levy, not just the people that insure it. So overall, people would be better off under that system, which then may make people more affordable to then go and buy flood insurance or try and source proper insurance so they can rebuild after these types of events.
So let's now bring in here Kate Cotter from the Resilient Building Council. Kate, you know, we're hearing about this, but as we know in Lismore, some people were moved out of their homes. We know that homes, government, have allowed, that is local government in many cases, have allowed homes to be built in areas where they should never have built. This is a part of the issue. This is a part of the government response that's required, given also that Australia's population continues to rise strongly.
Yeah, we've got essentially two problems here. We've got a legacy problem where we've made really bad decisions for 100 years and people, not through no fault of their own, are living in high-risk areas. They can't access insurance or get a mortgage or sell their property, and they are absolutely stuck. They are, in many cases, you know, all of our wealth in Australia is tied up with our property. That's where our wealth is. So for these families not to be able to rebuild, you know, to be able to afford insurance, they are carrying all of that risk. So this is really, you know, heartbreaking on many levels. So the response, we have to change the way we're thinking about resilience. It's not a cost, it's an investment. So we shouldn't be thinking about spending taxpayers' money with an empty, ongoing, you know, recovery budget. Eventually we won't be able to afford that. And so if we invest in upfront resilience, both at that household level, community and infrastructure level, that they're investments that return money back to this country in terms of stability for our financial systems. They keep our communities investable. They protect our economies. So I think we've got things backwards. We're sort of putting tiny little bits of investment in resilience and adaptation almost in a tokenistic way where we need enormous, huge investment. It's going to have to come from government because I think they've got to catalyse the rest of the market to be able to respond and to drive innovation. So we've got to stop making the same mistakes, because that's about investment, and we've got to repair the situation that we've created. And it's going to have to be significant funding, because the losses to our people and our economy are enormous. They're unsustainable.
And I think bringing in here Tom, so this is one of the big issues. This is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. Now, it obviously has an impact on insurance. We'll get to that very shortly. But the point is, even from your analysis, these events are happening more often. And the bigger you grow your population, the more people and therefore the more cost there is going to be when these events occur.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we look at Taree, for example, we know that the flood frequency there that happened a couple of months ago was an 800-year return period. But the flood levy there has a standard flood protection of about 100 years. We go back to Lismore a couple of years ago, the levy there only had a 10-year standard of flood protection, whereas the actual flood that went through there was a 500-year plus flood event. I think a lot of the infrastructure we have built in Australia at the moment for flood mitigation is built for old climate. We're certainly seeing an increase in frequency in high intensity flood events and rainfall events that lead to flooding. The bushfire season's getting longer over the observational period as well. But I would also say that it is exposure growth into hazardous areas that is problematic. A lot of the work that the ICA have done, shown here over the past several decades in Australia, we can see that upward of 90% of insured loss trend is because of exposure growth. And that's the same in the US as well. It's not just an Australia-centric problem. The bullseye's getting bigger. We're building things in the way. And I think, probably coming back to Kate's point, we're at this juxtaposition here where we're living with a legacy of what perhaps would be regarded in some areas as inappropriate development in floodplains and coastal zones. And we have to deal with that. But we also need to think into the future, how are we going to continue to build and have to build in areas like floodplains. Western Sydney is just a massive floodplain, for example. And how we do that with a risk away. Insurance certainly is one of those mechanisms, but I think we really need to have a hard, long look at the mitigation, the standard flood protection we've got here.
And strangely, this goes to migration, doesn't it? Because it actually comes down to, if you are going to bring migrants into this country, where are you going to house them? And that becomes a really key issue in terms of the way in which our cities are built, which the outskirts of our cities are built, and which in regional towns are built as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you have a look in New Zealand, for example, they've obviously got a big earthquake problem. And one of the solutions that they had was to build red zones around certain areas where you just can't build there anymore. Now, the extent to which that's feasible for flood in Australia is questionable, given that we've got Windsor, Penrith, Richmond already in big floodplain areas, Lismore, the whole of the mid-north coast is in a big floodplain area. But there are other mechanisms that we can look to. I mean, insurance in itself, the whole ethos of insurance is that the premiums of the many pay for the losses of the few. And I think we never want to aspire to a situation where everyone pays for their own risk.
Yes.
Because if that happens, then there are going to be large swaths of the community that just inevitably will be uninsurable.
Now, after the break, we hit the streets of Lismore and hear firsthand the problems that the massive floods have left for its business community. Thanks for being with us here on Business Weekend with part 2 of a special program devoted to Australia's response to natural disasters. We now turn to the response of insurance companies and banks and their role in ensuring our communities remain safe and viable. And as you'll hear from Wendy Taylor, the Mayor of the Maranoa Regional Council, home to Roma in Queensland, it was protected by a flood levy bank, but insurance costs still remain a serious issue in the community. Here's what she has to say and how the panel responded off the back of it.
It was in 2018 that we got the flood. We got the first stage of the flood levy, and it was that was 2014. Take it back, sorry. In 2018, we got the second stage, which was a diversion channel. So, hats off to the government of the day that made that happen, and so therefore, if you want to talk a little bit about insurance. And we did see a drop in our insurance when that happened. So someone was probably paying, I've just got it here, $3,200. Now they're paying $5,000. So it did come down for a little while, but now it's back up again.
Andrew Hall from the Insurance Council. There's an issue you raised earlier. Build more levies, make communities more protected by that. In this particular case, insurance costs are still going up, even in a place that has had a big levy bank put around it to protect it. So would some say maybe it doesn't have the impact, that maybe the insurance companies themselves have got to do more to protect these communities?
Roma is a very good example of where the right mitigation has been done. It was a very flood-prone town, and in fact, it was probably one of the one communities in Australia that actually experienced, in effect, redlining, like what we were talked about before with New Zealand. And the state government stepped in and they completed that flood levy around Roma. Now, I was out in Roma only a couple of weeks ago and I've met with Wendy and a whole bunch of the mayors out there. I've had a good look at the actual policies in force, and on average across the board in Roma, people are paying probably $200 or $300 more than on average in a Brisbane, for example. The issues that are affecting Roma in those sorts of costs that the Mayor outlined just then, while the peril risk has come down, insurance is also pricing the rebuild and restoration of a home. And the problem in a lot of regional areas now that we're experiencing across Australia is that once you get outside that metropolitan ring, the cost of building goes up significantly. And we've got an acute shortage of builders, we've got an acute shortage of electricians. We are seeing the supply chains fall over. Insurers can't get enough builders on their building panels to be able to provide policies in certain areas. So we've got this double-pronged approach that while we reduce the risk on one hand, we've also got to do something about the supply side of builders, labourers, building supplies, and get inflation under control.
So hang on, whose issue is that though? Is that the insurance companies, or is that the governments, or is that the communities?
Well, the insurers are pricing the cost and the risk. And in many cases, I guess we wear the burden of having to tell a small community that it is becoming more and more expensive to insure a replacement of your property. If we were to do something to cap those prices, effectively what we're ending up doing is spreading that pool across a bunch of other properties that live in safer locations. Now, my real concern in life is this. Data is only going to drive more individual pricing as we move forward. And as we start losing that pooling effect of insurance premiums in things like home and contents, we're going to see those homes at most at risk, those ones that have got the biggest flood exposures, for example, they will become very expensive. And I'm very concerned about what the future looks like for people in those high-risk areas.
Because what you're saying is that there are some communities, some people, some businesses that will not be able to insure, either to be able to afford it or indeed will choose not to have it. So fewer people insured is not a good thing. So Tom, I'll go to you on this very subject, because reinsurers obviously make their decisions about which communities they can afford to back and where they'll take the risk and where they won't. And in some places, there are parts of Australia where reinsurers simply don't want to go. That's fair to say, isn't it?
Well, insurers have found it difficult to buy reinsurance recently in Australia. So over the past few years, we've gone through something called a hard market cycle, where actually the investors in the global reinsurers themselves lost confidence in the reinsurers that they had an ability to price climate risk. They were making heavy losses. And so there was a price adjustment in the global market then. Ever since, it's been quite difficult for the primary insurance market to actually get adequate reinsurance cover. It's become more expensive, it's become less available. And ever since then, global catastrophe losses, as we call them, both in the US and here, elsewhere in the world, a lot of the risk has fallen on the side of the primary insurance market. So we see that in Hurricane Milton, we saw that in the recent LA bushfires as well. That's not a good thing for policyholders, because that price gets passed on by the insurer.
And so therefore inflated insurance premiums come as a result, so the whole community effectively pays.
Correct, but I would actually also point out that the net reinsurance cost of a premium, typical premium in New South Wales is pretty small. In fact, it goes within the bucket of about 20%, which is the general insurer costs, which is net cost of reinsurance, and it's also the expenses and profit margin. Probably in New South Wales, we have on average about 30% of a premium is taxation, which is the GST, the stamp duty, the levies. Actually, across the board, the peril risk, the base peril risk, is only about 20%. Now, I would point out that we need to kind of bucket these things into two bits. Across the board, as Andrew mentioned, insurance premiums have been going up considerably over the past couple of years, and that's been driven by rebuild costs. That's away from areas in very hazardous locations. For all of those communities that are out in the tail, that are in the floodplain, that have been affected by cyclone risk, for example, those where insurance premiums are, $20,000, $30,000, they are very much driven by flood risk and by cyclone risk. And so we almost need to look at these as two different buckets about how we actually resolve the problem. But certainly for those out in the tail, it needs to be about resilience and it needs to be about mitigation. Otherwise, we're just not getting to the root cause of the problem.
Okay, so bring in Kate Cotter here. And Kate Cotter, of course, Resilient Building Council. This is one of the big issues that we just spoke about earlier, and that is if there are a whole bunch of people in potential harm's way from historic building, and they either have to be relocated or rebuilt to make them resilient, then we run into these building costs all over the place, and that adds to the price for someone, be it an insurer, be it the individual, or be it government.
Yeah, they're all related, aren't they? So we see, huge cost increase post-disaster because we can't get the materials and the labour in to help people repair and rebuild. So trying to avoid that disaster from happening in the first place, of course, helps reduce that inflationary pressure that happens after disasters. So that is one thing we can contribute to. The main part, I guess, we are attacking in terms of insurance is being able to measure and recognise the risk reduction. So whether that's what people do to their own buildings, their own businesses and homes, but also what governments and others might invest in at the community and infrastructure level, so that we can say, right, these things from an engineering perspective, we can measure the risk reduction, and then we can start targeting where that most effective investment can occur and what those solutions might be. So it means we can be far more targeted, effective and efficient with our capital, whether it's private or public capital, and we can reward and reduce that risk, particularly where it's the most high. So in some cases that means retrofitting might be useful, upgrading stormwater, it might be fire breaks and levees. In some cases, it's very difficult to reduce the risk to an insurable level, and that's where we've got to have very strategic long-term decisions about where we might need to move communities and coming up with different solutions. But we have to be able to measure it, we have to be honest about it, and we have to really pump in the investment to address this problem.
And just a reminder, the full program will be available on Sky News YouTube channel and on our website. Anyway, that is it for the program this Sunday. Up next, all the latest news right here on Sky News. Business Weekend returns next Sunday, but of course you can keep up to date with all the latest business news with our daily program, Business Now, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and via our website, skynews.com.au. Thanks for your company today. I'm Ross Greenwood. We'll see you next week.